Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Kanoa Reviews. Today we review another game that was requested by one of you. As we get more subscribers, I of course will get more requests and I can only do so many reviews each month. So please be patient with me and continue to let me know what games you want me to review. Today we take a look at the massive scale World War II real-time strategy game R.U.S.E. The game was released back in 2010 by developer Eugen System and published by Ubisoft. I remember when they first showcased this game, they made use of a cool looking touch sensitive surface where you could control your units with your hands, which looked nice but felt rather gimmicky. The big thing about R.U.S.E. is that it promised to deliver an RTS experience on an epic scale on maps covering tens of square kilometers, but one that would be very accessible to even newcomers. The name itself came from the fact that you would be able to deceive your opponent, both AI or players, by using decoys, radio silence, spies, and more. But let's take a look at the overall presentation and what the campaign has to offer. The game unfortunately is not available on Steam anymore, thereby diminishing its mainstream PC audience. The game was released on PC as on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and unfortunately because of that, it has some limitations, yet delivers an experience that impresses in terms of presentation. The campaign has you starting in Africa in the midst of World War II, as you take part in several important battles, including fights in Sicily afterwards, and eventually of course Normandy, Holland, Belgium, and Germany. Since Ubisoft was involved, the initial budget was a bit higher than your average RTS on this scale. Back then, there were games that made the same approach like Theater of War, but it lacked polish and was not as accessible as R.U.S.E. would be. To start with, a minor point is that I really disliked the storytelling that was happening with the cutscenes throughout the campaign. I have mentioned this before in the Medal of Honor Airborne review, and that is that it's difficult for storytellers to tell an engaging World War II story on a massive scale since you just want to experience the battles. Petty drama and politics feel too melodramatic Shakespeare-like, which often does not feel like it belongs in a World War II tale. The main character we follow is an American higher-up as we follow his journey as he rises through the ranks. Along the way, he's accompanied by a British officer and an American female aide. There's constant bickering, drama, and even flirtation going on between these characters, and it is very tiring, and I disliked almost all of these characters instantly and wished they would just shut up. Luckily, the cutscenes are never too long, but it did make the overall experience more tiring, and to point out to a World War II campaign that does do storytelling very well in such a setting, I have to point towards Company of Heroes. But with that out of the way, let's finally start with some positive things, because there's a lot to be had. The game levels are presented in these massive maps where you can zoom in very close and see all of the individual units move in real time in 3D, or zoom all the way out above the clouds to get a good overview. To still get a clear idea of where your units are, their models will be highlighted by blue pucks, as if you were playing a board game. A nice little feature is that if you zoom all the way out and look around, you can actually see that the battle map is located on an actual table surrounded by men collecting intel, as if you were playing the battle out ahead on the table itself. The maps are so big that they often get reused during different missions during the campaign, but in this case, that is not a problem at all, since they still feel very different. An example can be seen very early on during the Africa campaign, where you start in the desert in the first level, then head through urban areas during the second, and then head towards the coast in the final one, leaving you with different missions with distinct different feeling scenarios on the same map. What is also cool is that during the mission progress, you can clearly see a change in the front happening over time. Despite the battles and map being so massive in scale, the game really eases you in by only giving you control over a small number of units and gradually expanding your possibility, unit types, and just sheer numbers of units under your control. And I actually really like this. I'm not the type of RTS gamer that likes to micromanage all these different units and send them out to do different tasks. In a way, I prefer building a large city or establishment, get a good economy going, and then pumping out an army large enough to which I can crush the AI and just sit back and look at the havoc I've created. Despite you only having to worry about controlling a handful of units, the game makes sure to keep the scale of the overall battle epic, since you have a ton of allied units fight alongside you in completely different areas of the map. There's room to breathe and take in the scenery as you look in the distance and see tanks clash with each other and planes hunting one another down. It really makes you feel like you are part of a larger battle, and is very satisfying to watch him play, and as mentioned earlier, quite impressive, seeing as this is a multi-platform title. There are a few things I did notice that have not aged well, and would therefore argue that by now there are better alternatives out there in terms of presentation, like the Wargame franchise or Steel Division, though again, they are not as newbie friendly as R.U.S.E is. Especially infantry look terrible when zoomed in, and it gets even iterated more when you are playing the D-Day mission, which is very underwhelming during the beach invasion, though I guess it can be argued that you are experiencing Utah Beach rather than Omaha. The tanks also move ridiculously fast and feel more like Hot Wheel toys than actual tanks, something that definitely is not the case with the earlier mentioned Wargame titles. In a way, this quicker pace makes R.U.S.E feel more like an arcade style of RTS rather than a realistic type. What the game does do very well though is introduce new mechanics or units in each mission, therefore creating quite a good sense of diversity in the missions themselves. You get eased into using new unit types like anti-tank guns, machine gun bunkers, tank destroyers, and even planes very gradually. Often you get objectives assigned that specifically cater to this, making you actually go out of your way to use and learn these mechanics and units. Another cool thing is that it does retain some old school feeling of RTS games back in the day, like the Age of Empires, as you do need to build certain buildings like barracks, airfields, etc. in order to build and unleash units. You also will need to erect supply depots that are spread throughout the map that will provide you with convoys, which will grant you more money in order to pump out more troops. It's very cool and nostalgic, and I love it a lot more than what strategy games usually do nowadays, with only focusing on the units rather than the building aspect. The objectives you will be facing are, though diverse, nothing to write home about regarding RTS veterans. You will have your typical objectives like attack and destroy an HQ, defend and hold a position for a set amount of time, or intercept an enemy convoy before they reach their destination. Again, in terms of presentation, we have seen this done better in other games like Company of Heroes, World in Conflict, and I would even dare to say classics like Warcraft 3. In the end, I have to say that though I found R.U.S.E to be quite enjoyable, with the most notable aspect being the portrayal of battles on quite an epic scale, it does not do anything out of the ordinary and has by now been overhauled by other titles. Will I then still recommend R.U.S.E? Definitely, but mostly to people who want to get into RTS games that are more on an epic scale and would like to gradually be learned the ropes rather than the other more difficult alternatives. It might be a good stepping stone, and then when they are done with R.U.S.E, then they can change to one of the more recent games that present RTS on this scale. Again, the storyline is terrible, but the battles are fun to do, with plenty of units to choose from, and a clever R.U.S.E system where you can trick your opponent into thinking you are doing something which you actually aren't. The AI will use this on you too, which makes it feel more than just a tacky gimmick, and in the end, I am happy to say that I give R.U.S.E an 8.2, which is still an awesome experience, with some minor points including the story presentation and the fact that I thought it did not stand a test of time in terms of presentation, something that a game like Company of Heroes did do and is actually 4 years older than R.U.S.E. All in all, there's much fun to be had, and the missions that it offers are meaty and give the player a good solid experience that lasts 20 to 30 minutes for each mission. There are even some extra factions one can play as in multiplayer, making the overall package well worth the price it's shipping for nowadays.